Every genre has a quintessential opus, some work of art that perfectly embodies that which every like-minded film aspires to achieve. They're not necessarily the best films, but they are so fundamental to the very identity of their genre that it's difficult to imagine a world without them. Films like The Exorcist for horror,
who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
Amen.
or The Maltese Falcon for film noir.
This is the second time that you've laid hands on me. When you're slapped, you'll take it and like it.
For action, that film is unquestionably James Cameron's Aliens.
We're on express elevator to hell. Going down.
2, 1, mark.
The film exists in two different versions, the 1986 theatrical release and the 1991 special edition. And if we're being honest, the best version of that film has yet to be edited.
It won't make any difference.
But the truly wonderful, magical thing about this movie is that it's almost impossible to care about its imperfections because it's simply too damn awesome for them to matter. Infinitely quotable,
Game over, man. It's game over.
masterfully suspenseful, cathartically thrilling.
Punch it, Bishop!
This film was the crown jewel of the era of big hair and big explosions. And yet, none of that is what makes this film so interesting.
Magnificent, isn't it?
My name is Rafa, and for me at least, it's the radical departure from its predecessor that makes it so intriguing. The first film is a horror classic defined by its anxieties about sexuality and gender in a world whose institutions and technology offer no protection, comfort, or guidance. And James Cameron followed that up with a rousing war film unshakably confident in its understanding of the world. While Alien offers no explanation for why everything has gone to hell, just that it has, and that the company, whoever they are, had something to do with it.
Damn company.
Aliens knows exactly what went wrong, who to blame and why, and how to fix it. But first, why the big change? Well, quite simply, the 80s happened.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Before Ronald Reagan came along, 1970s America was in a bit of a funk. The Vietnam War was lost, and with it, any sense of American invincibility and righteousness. The oil crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis, the recession, the decline of the auto industry, all these things and more contributed to an overall sense of American impotence and an unraveling social fabric. Films like First Blood and The Deer Hunter explicitly dealt with the crisis of identity and disunity Americans as a people experienced in the sobering aftermath of the Vietnam War, featuring returning veterans struggling and failing to find a place in the country that was once their home. Alien, as much a product of its time as any other work of art, is infused with a similar sense of being cut adrift by an institution the protagonist was pledged to serve, lost in a broken world with no clear remedy. But then the Reagan 80s came along, a decade that saw a resurgence in conservative values and American exceptionalism. The nation seemed to rediscover its identity, and with it, its well of strength. The swaggering bravura that had all but disappeared came roaring right back, and American cinema began to reflect that. First Blood Part 2, for example, is a revisionist fantasy where John Rambo redeems his country's honor and triumphs over his trauma by rescuing POWs his government left to rot, unleashing vengeance upon the cruel enemies who left him and his people broken. Where the first film was depressing, this one is an adrenaline-fueled barn burner about a man and his country getting their mojo back.
Do we get to win this time?
This time it's up to you.
If you notice a few similarities between this film and Aliens,
you're going out there to destroy them, right? Not to study, not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
That's the plan. You have my word on it.
All right, I'm in.
well, James Cameron happened to write both. It's no secret that Cameron intended to make Aliens about Vietnam as well. But this time around, the fantasy of winning a rematch is tempered by a more nuanced, conservative critique of what went wrong in the first place. At the time, there was a renewed conviction that American institutions and capitalist ideals were inherently good.
And make no mistake, America is recovery bound, and the world knows it.
So the blame for misfortunes and misdeeds shifted toward individuals who had betrayed that inherent goodness. This ideological shift is omnipresent in the film. Instead of blaming the company as a whole, and by extension capitalism, the film blames Burke, an ambitious asshole acting alone.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
Sure, the company bigwigs give Ripley a lot of grief.
But I'm telling you that those things exist.
Thank you, Officer Ripley. That will be all.
And we're certainly responsible for allowing the establishment of a colony on LV-426. And yes, their slogan is clearly meant to be ironic. But while bureaucratic BS may plague the company, it's certainly not presented as an evil cabal. The film takes care to note that they were ignorant of any danger at the time.
Are there any species like this hostile organism on LV-426?
No, it's a rock. No indigenous life.
And their unwillingness to believe Ripley is reasonable, given decades without incident at the colony.
There have been people there for over 20 years, and they never complained about any hostile organism.
Rather, it is Burke, and Burke alone, who initiates the catastrophe, sending colonists to investigate Ripley's claims, and making things worse at every opportunity.
You sent them out there, and you didn't even warn them. Why didn't you warn them, Burke?
Okay, look. What if that ship didn't even exist? Did you ever think about that? I didn't know. So now if I went and made a major security situation out of it, everybody steps in, administration steps in, and there's no exclusive rights for anybody. Nobody wins. So I made a decision, and it was wrong. It was a bad call, Ripley. It was a bad call.
Bad call?
Right.
These people are dead, Burke! Don't you have any idea what you've done here?
Out of the two institutions in the film, the military comes out looking the worst. And here the film is a bit more ambiguous. Do we blame the bad apples like the incompetent leader?
Tell them to fall back. Tell them to fall back.
You're cut off! Do something!
And the paper tiger?
This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Or do we blame a military culture that, paradoxically, fosters both blind obedience...
Let's go, Marine. Give it up. Frost, you got the duty. Open that bag.
...and poor discipline?
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
Well, the film seems to suggest both. On the one hand, Gorman ordering the soldiers not to shoot, and thus setting them up to fail, is a story development that echoes the claim that America would have won in Vietnam if the government had the conviction to fight without restraint.
And I did what I had to do to win, but somebody wouldn't let us win!
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
And again, this order does not come from some unseen, faceless entity, but from one man.
So what?
On the other hand, these Marines are almost cartoonishly overconfident in their superiority over an alien species they view as mere bugs.
Look, man, I only need to know one thing. Where they are.
Their inability to maintain combat discipline in their first encounter with the xenomorphs is a direct result of their arrogance clashing with reality. Either way, the military is still presented as something inherently good, even if it has strayed from its nobility. Its mission is still virtuous. Bravery and self-sacrifice are still its defining characteristics. And the two bad apples both redeem themselves in their final moments. Corporal Hicks is the film's conception of the ideal soldier. Quick thinking.
Fuck. Hold up.
Cool under fire, and humble.
He's just a grunt. No offense.
None taken.
Hicks rises from his lowly position and shoulders the responsibility of leadership in a time of crisis with admirable grace.
This operation is under military jurisdiction, and Hicks is next in chain of command. Am I right, Corporal?
Yeah, that's right.
The film seems to suggest the military can return to its former glory if it tried harder to produce more soldiers like Hicks instead of Hudson or Gorman. But you need no further proof of this film's intensely politicized take on the Alien franchise than its treatment of its core elements, the alien and Ripley. In the first film, the alien was a solitary, mysterious creature who was symbolic of universal issues of sexual violence and gender identity, placed in a context that was more timeless than it was topical. Its assault on traditional notions of motherhood was opposed by the atypical figure of Ripley, who didn't quite fit into any established gender roles and whose lone act of maternal defiance was saving a cat. Which is why James Cameron's greatest contribution to the alien mythos, the Queen, was also its most radical. On the surface, it seems like a perfectly logical extension of what we already know.
But each one of these things comes from an egg, right? So who's laying these eggs?
But really, the theatrical release of Alien only established that this thing came from eggs. There was no suggestion of a social structure. Cameron's transformation of the alien into a hive species was therefore devoid of any basis in the previous film, and as such it was a massive game changer. The first and most obvious consequence was that the alien became a metaphor for communism. An endless swarm of cruel, collectivist drones threatening to overrun a planet is pretty close to the classic American caricature of communism that prevailed during the Cold War. The xenomorph's sneaky ambushes and relentless expenditure of fighters as cannon fodder also bears resemblance to popular culture's image of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. And the hive itself, with images of cocooned captives dying horrifically one by one, touches on a favorite trope of the Vietnam War film, the POW camp. But the second and far more interesting consequence was that it completely transformed the alien's sexual threat.
Looks like love at first sight to me.
In the first film, the alien is a masculine or gender-fluid monster that kills through rape or rape-like acts that threaten the male identity of some of its victims. But while that gendered anxiety still exists...
Have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
The phallic threat of the first film becomes subordinate to a far more threatening matriarchal power. The unstoppable rapist has been one-upped by the seemingly infinite fertility of a monstrous mother who does not appear to need male intervention to reproduce, nor is in any way regulated by it. A female whose sexual power is completely free from male influence is, in many ways, a conservative nightmare. But in this case in particular, it appears to be because the Queen stands in direct opposition to the nuclear family. The revision of Ripley's character proves the central importance of the family in Cameron's film. In the 1991 special edition, it's clear that Ripley was rewritten as a single mother who neglected her child in pursuit of her career.
I promised her that I'd be home for her birthday. Her 11th birthday.
And this transgression of traditional family values resulted in the loss of her child and the loss of her career.
It is the finding of this court of inquiry that Warrant Officer E. Ripley, NOC 14472, has acted with questionable judgment and is unfit to hold an ICC license as a commercial flight officer.
As opposed to the theatrical release, where the absence of that scene focuses the themes more on Ripley's lack of traditional maternity rather than her outright rejection of it. But either way, in electing her career over her family, Ripley's character at the beginning of the film seems to embody the conservative belief that the rise of second-wave feminism in the 70s was eroding family cohesion and upending gender roles that were wholesome rather than oppressive.
I do think that men and women are different, and that in certain areas they have different roles, which is apparently the most obnoxious four-letter word to the type of people who really want a gender-free society.
The right's response to the left's vision of feminine liberation was the strong mother, a Margaret Thatcher-type figure emboldened with greater social, political, and economic agency, yet still firmly entrenched in her destiny as a homemaker and caretaker.
Well, I don't know about Dad's army, But I'm a mum, and I'd like to think that those who believe in keeping Britain strong, free, and properly defended belong in Mum's army.
The faintly androgynous Ripley of the first film becomes
Ellen,
a woman on a journey of redemption through the lens of a distinctly conservative vision of feminine power. First, she pulls a Rambo, going back to the war zone to finish the job and save the prisoners who were left behind. In so doing, she not only puts the Vietnam War back in the win column, but she also manages to overcome her PTSD through her own individual effort, confronting her personal demons without needing to confide her emotional issues to anyone, nor rely on anyone for therapeutic guidance. It's hard to imagine a more emphatic endorsement of the just get over it ethos than that. She also reclaims her maternity by becoming the surrogate mother for the orphaned Newt, whose classic American family of bootstrap-pulling pioneers was annihilated by the alien queen's profane offspring.
They're dead. All right, can I go now?
She then finds Newt a father figure in Hicks, the bond symbolized here in the wrist tracker handed down from Hicks to Ripley to Newt. Ripley doesn't even have to kiss Hicks to seal this union, a virtuous chastity that stands in clear opposition to the Queen's rampant sexuality. In the battle between the good mother and the bad mother, the good mother wins. This ultimately is the key to the film's popularity. Despite the tremendous losses and sacrifice endured by our main characters, the film is undeniably optimistic. Even America's uneasy relationship to nuclear weapons is given a positive consequence. Unlike Alien, in which the nuclear explosion has no effect on the enemy, here the explosion, however accidental, nonetheless eradicates the alien hive. With the alien queen banished to the void, the victory is total. The enemy has been completely exterminated, conquered by the traditional American ideal. The fierce, loving mother, the brave and noble father, and the adorable, precocious blonde daughter, together ready to build a better world. And then they made Alien 3, which I will get to after I finish part 2 to Star Wars and Star Trek, so please subscribe if you enjoy listening to me drone on about movies. Also, I will be releasing a channel update video, because not updating in 5 months deserves a little bit of an explanation, so stay tuned for that.